When I was a kid, the disaster we worried about most was a nuclear war. Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. We're not ready for the next epidemic. In fact, let's look at a model of a virus spread through the air like the Spanish flu back in 1918. So here's what would happen. It would spread throughout the world very, very quickly. And you can see there's over 30 million people die from that epidemic. So this is a serious problem. We should be concerned. If we start now, we can be ready for the next epidemic. Thank you.
These are parts of the talk Bill Gates gave after the Ebola pandemic in 2016, expressing on one of the most followed platforms in the world how lucky we were with the Ebola virus. Through this famous talk that you can find on YouTube, I will leave the link in the description of this video, Bill showed with statistics that the world would not be ready to face the next epidemic if it was slightly more contagious than Ebola or appeared in a more populated area like, Wuhan in China. And here we are, 5 years later, less than a decade. The world is experiencing a pandemic that has killed more than 4.55 million people to date and continues to do so. It seems then that whatever the misfortunes or unfortunate events, there are always people who manage to emerge their heads held high as if they had a head start or had always prepared for those moments when everyone else is desperately plunging in bankruptcy or even into extinction. We live in a constantly changing world with no certainty. The book Sept leçons de vie, written by Jacques Attali, gives us the general lines to anticipate and be ready to face uncertainty. He develops between these lines 7 lessons that are part of a cycle to prepare oneself, whether as a person or as a company. The first life lesson Jacques Attali expressed in his book is self-respect. In this sense, one must have the desire to live and not only survive. One must consider oneself as capable as an actor without shame or self-hatred. For Jacques Attali, respect oneself is to know oneself deeply. It is taking stock of our weaknesses and strengths, analyze and understand our failures. It is facing the truth of who we are. Here are his exact words. Respecting oneself leads us to detoxify ourselves from the models inherent to wasteful societies, not to consume products that are emblems of vanity, without being forced to do so by the crisis. Not to accept being reduced to what we have, but to what we are. The second life lesson is giving intensity to time. Giving intensity means basically 3 things. It means taking care of one's body, taking care of one's mind, and building a long-term project according to one's objectives. Indeed, for Attali, one must be capable of projecting oneself over a minimum of 20 years, updating the plan and oneself frequently, arbitrating in favor of an immediate sacrifice if it is beneficial in the long run. The third one, empathy. Putting oneself in others' shoes, understanding their cultures, their ways of thinking, their ways of doing things in order to be able to anticipate their reactions and to be able to distinguish potential enemies from allies. It's also necessary to be able to admit that the enemy is right without feeling anger and show humility and a deep desire to understand. Some opponents just oppose to please themselves, while others do so for rational reasons. We must differentiate them. The fourth one, resilience. Once opportunities and threats have been identified, it is necessary to develop counterattack mechanisms to prepare several emergency or replacement plans. It means being multi-skilled, having a personal treasury, not indulge in extravagant expenses, and continuously train oneself even alone. The whole thing of resilience is about preparing to face and adapt. 5. Creativity. Jacques Attali expresses creativity as the ability to turn any threat into an opportunity. If threats persist despite all preparations to be resilient, creativity is needed to turn the opponent's strength into an asset. This requires a healthy dose of positive thinking and courage. Creativity is also like a muscle and therefore requires exercise and learning. 6. Ubiquity. Don't settle for a single identity. If in spite of all the stratagems implemented, problem persists, one must be ready to change radically, but nevertheless with self-respect. To be ready for this, one must live as lightly as possible, not to burden oneself with sedentary possessions, accumulate only nomadic ideas, experiences, knowledge, relationships, possessions, and wealth. To think of one's reason of being independent of any reason of having. Do not depend on a single company, one language, or one financial source. 7. Revolutionary thinking. When things get really bad and we have no other choice, we have to be ready to overturn and shake up all the rules, to break with preconceived ideas, to unlearn and relearn. These are the 7 lessons covered in the book of Jacques Attali, sept leçons de vie. We can regularly and clearly refine once a week the way we are implementing these rules in our lives. Silent meditation with availability of mind and humility help a lot doing that. Jacques Attali, for example, spends 2 hours every Friday reviewing his program for the next 3 months. Personally, I interpret these lessons as headings that I would have to work on or develop through my future learning. They are like general conducts we can customize to our lives depending on where we are now. Just after reading the book in April 2017, I started learning about self-discipline, habits, and other things that have so far been of great help.